In today's video, you're going to see an entire beach invaded by alien-like orange goo and various sea monsters belched out by the ocean itself. But first, let's look at an ecological disaster brought to western shores by the 2011 Japan tsunami. Ecological disaster. The massive tsunami that devastated Japan in 2011 carved a path of destruction into the country. However, the massive wave's effects aren't only confined to Japan and the countries surrounding it. Even countries in North America are dealing with the aftermath of the disaster, albeit many months later. One remnant of the tsunami washed up on one of the beaches of Oregon, and it brought along with it the potential for ecological disaster. In June of 2012, a 66-foot long, 19-foot wide, and 7-foot tall dock weighing approximately 188 metric tons washed ashore on Agate Beach north of Newport, Oregon. Its origins were traced to a port of Misawa, northern Honshu in Japan, where it was dislodged by the massive tsunami. It was one of 3 identical docks, one of which was recovered in Japan, and the other, well, no one actually knows where the other is. The dock was chock full of marine life. Marine biologists discovered that there were more than 117 Japanese species of marine protists, which include algae and invertebrates, which also includes sponge, hydroids, sea anemones, snails, clams and mussels, chitons, barnacles, crabs, and other crustaceans. Also sea stars, sea urchins, sea cucumbers, sea squirts, and seaweed. While all those may sound like cool finds, they all have the potential to be very dangerous invasive species. Chief among these invaders is the algae Undaria pinnatophyta, a species of algae that is considered highly invasive. Authorities acted quickly to prevent a massive ecological disaster, but more than a decade later, it does remain to be seen whether the Oregon shores will be taken over by invaders from the east. Trunco. Trunco is the unofficial name given to an animal that was reportedly sighted in Margate, South Africa on October 25, 1924. It was initially described in London's Daily Mail as a fish like a polar bear. A weird description, but you'll see why in a bit. Witnesses say that the creature was first seen off the coast battling 2 killer whales, a fight that they said lasted 3 long hours. It used its tail to attack the whales and reportedly lifted itself out of the water by about 20 feet. With Trunco's carcass being washed onto shore by massive waves, it's pretty clear who won the fight though. There it lay for 10 days, but no scientists came over to investigate the carcass, hence the reason why no reliable description was ever published at the time. The actual description only came about decades later in September of 2010. Trunco was described as possessing snow-white fur, hence the polar bear description. It also possessed an elephantine trunk, a lobster-like tail, and, well, his carcass was even said to be devoid of blood. When measured, it was 47 feet long, 10 feet wide, and 5 feet tall. Its trunk alone exceeded about 5 feet, with a diameter of 14 inches. Its tail measured up at 10 feet, and its thick snowy white fur was measured at 8 inches. Defying more conventions, its trunk was actually located on the animal's torso rather than the animal's face like an elephant. Its name, which I admit is quite catchy, was coined by British zoologist Carl Schucker, which he first used in his 1996 book called The Unexplained. In a slightly different account published in March 27, 1925, in the edition of the Charleroi Mail in Charlery, Pennsylvania, it was said that the trunk was the victor of the fight between the whales. Both were killed and Trunk, exhausted from the fight, washed up on a beach and fell unconscious. It then made its way back into the ocean and swam away after 10 days, never to be seen again. Agent Orange. No, I'm not talking about that chemical allegedly used by US forces during the Vietnam War. This is something totally different, but just as equally orange. Residents of a small village in Alaska were sent into a panic when they witnessed something really strange lining the shore of the lagoons in Kivalina. So much so that many residents thought that this was the signal that the end of the world was about to begin. According to the residents of the small town, located 650 miles north of Anchorage, the orange-colored, goo-like substance had an oily feel to it, much like baby oil. It was also pretty much odorless. It was also possible that the orange goo rained down in the village during the night, as it was also found in buckets used by the villagers to collect rainwater. Upon closer look, the goo looked like tiny round fish eggs, although very unlike any other fish eggs the villagers had seen before. Also, the sheer quantity of it covering the shoreline was truly unbelievable. But what could these orange, oily, egg-like globules be? I'll leave it to the NOAA to find the answer. At first, it was believed that the strange goo was comprised of billions of tiny crustacean eggs, with fatty oil seen through the transparent egg sacs causing the curious orange color. Turned out to not be the case though. Further analysis discovered that it was actually a mass of spores from a type of fungus called rust, named so for its distinctive orange color. Granted though, it was located in a quantity and location never before seen. Mystery solved, right? Well, not quite. You see, samples tested didn't match anything any specimen of rust spore has ever seen before. Its weird ooze was some undiscovered species of rust fungus. Whether it's harmful like the actual Agent Orange, that remains to be seen. One big bug. You think bugs can only be found on land? Well, think again, kiddo. The ocean floor is also covered with these tiny creatures. It's just that they're not called insects at all, but rather isopods. Marine isopods are a diverse group of animals with various feeding strategies, such as scavenging, filter feeding, and parasitism. They live in environments from the shallow shore all the way down to the deep sea. They're pretty much bug-sized as well, like their terrestrial counterparts. Some can actually be as tiny as 10 millimeters long, and others grow to a couple of inches, and that's that. That's why it terrified a few people when the size of a puppy washed onto one of the beaches in Indonesia in 2020. These giant isopods, later classified under the genus of Bathynomus, can grow to over 1.5 feet in length, so imagine a cockroach growing to those proportions. The thought sends chills down my spine. They grow so large because of a phenomenon called deep-sea gigantism, which is basically the blanket explanation for the reason why some animals found in the deep sea tend to be much larger than their relatives in shallow waters. 2 specimens were found washed up on the beach, one male and one female. And based on these 2, scientists were able to determine that they were a new giant isopod species. These guys live in extremely deep water, from 3,000 feet down to as deep as over 4,000 feet. So it's possible that a particularly strong wave was able to scoop them up from the ocean floor onto dry land where everyone can be terrified of their alienish looks and monstrous size. Twin-headed cutie. All of the strange creatures that we've seen so far have been pretty scary in one way or another. I think it's about time, though, that we move on to something that's positively adorable. Fishermen in the North Sea got the surprise of their lives when they spotted this 2-headed baby porpoise on the beach. They didn't really pursue much of it, though, as they thought it'd be illegal for them to keep the creature. They are licensed fishermen after all, so they decided to return the creature back into the ocean, but not before getting a few snapshots of it for the world to see. It's a shame they had to return it to the water, though. This was the first of its kind to be seen in the world, and marine biologists would have had a field day studying it. While case studies of conjoined twins have been studied in humans, reptiles, and domestic animals, they're rarely seen in wild mammals. In fact, before this find, only 9 other instances of 2-headed cetaceans of any kind had ever been reliably documented. Hence, scientists were disappointed to find out that the chance to study such a rare creature had slipped through their fingers. While some of you might argue that letting the creature live its life out in the wild is a better option, you should understand the fact that animals with such conditions rarely, if ever, reach adulthood. Arguments could have been made that keeping and studying the rare animal in order to understand how animals evolve more beneficial, but that's about that. In fact, this particular porpoise wouldn't have survived for even a couple of days after that. Its dorsal fins weren't yet erect, its rostrum, or rostrums in this case, still had hair on them, and it even still had an umbilical opening. These are all indicators that the porpoise was found really soon after birth. The Philippine Globster. Trunco isn't the only strange, hairy creature to be washed up on shore by strong waves. Monsters like it have been found dead on beaches all over the world for centuries. In fact, we could also make a video dedicated to just those incidences. Sound off in the comments if you want us to make that video. For now, though, let's take a look at this creature who was found dead on a beach on the Dinagat Islands in the Philippines back in 2017. The strange creature was found a few days after a particularly strong earthquake hit the country. Fearing for their lives, especially after what happened a few years back in Japan, residents fled to higher ground following tsunami warnings. When it was safe to return to their homes, residents received a shock when they found this mysterious creature slowly rotting on the beach. The globster, as creatures like these are commonly called, was an animal that measured roughly 20 feet long, weighing over 4,000 pounds, and, much like Trunco, was covered in long, shaggy white hair. It was initially thought that the globster was in fact the remains of a manatee known locally as the dugong. That theory, however, was quickly disproven. Upon taking a closer look, marine biologists concluded that the unidentifiable blob was actually a corpse of a whale that had been dead for at least 2 weeks. The hair seen on the creature was most likely decomposing muscle fibers, though. The marine mammal must have been at the bottom of the ocean, but the waves caused by the earthquake unearthed it from its watery grave and deposited it onto dry land. The Sakhalin sea wolf. The globster known as the Sakhalin seawolf was discovered by Russian soldiers on the shores of Sakhalin Island. This remote island is located 5,000 miles east of Moscow and is actually closer to Japan than to Russia itself. That's why when the soldiers first saw the strange pile of clearly rotting flesh, they immediately thought that the carcass belonged to a strange eastern creature unknown and unseen before by anybody in the Western world. And honestly, what they found was an extremely weird sight indeed. The creature's bones didn't appear to be that of a fish, something that contradicts its long fish-like tail though. The remains were also neither a crocodile's nor an alligator's, a conclusion deduced not only from the skeleton but also from the long black hair that covered the mysterious animal's skin. It couldn't have been a sea lion either, the carcass was simply too big. So what kind of creature could it have been? A cryptid perhaps? Some previously undescribed animal that's never been seen alive by man? Well, not quite. Like with many globster sightings, the most probable explanation for the Sakhalin seawolf is a case of mistaken identity. When studied, the skull of the creature showed features that belonged to a large marine mammal. Most likely explanation is the carcass belonged to either a beluga whale or a killer whale. This is all but certain, and although an actual DNA test has not been done, it's probably the only thing that would convince cryptid fanboys that the seawolf is not the previously undiscovered sea monster they were hoping for. Now it's time for today's best pick. Today's pick is one of the first, if not the first, of the hundreds of strange creatures, massive waves that propped onto the beach the world over. And being one of the first to be seen, it's also one of the first to make people wonder what other monsters might live in the deep ocean. The St. Augustine Monster. Toward the end of 1896, two boys walking on the beach in Anastasia Island, Florida, made a curious discovery. Laying there was a giant pear-shaped blob of grayish goo that lay sprawled out on the sand, bulbous at one end and seemingly mutilated appendages trailing off at the other. The blob, which the press would later dub the St. Augustine Monster, was about 21 feet long, 7 feet wide, and weighed an estimated 7 tons. Little did anybody know that this was only the first of many such unidentifiable creatures to be found decades onwards, though. The two boys reported their discovery to Dr. DeWitt Webb, a local physician and amateur naturalist who was also president of the local St. Augustine Scientific Society. Several horses and men were used to haul the carcass from out of the tides and made haste to inform the scientific community about this strange creature's existence. Webb believed the carcass to be that of a fabled giant octopus, one that was also featured in tales of sailors about a large sea monster attacking and sinking ships. However, using modern scientific techniques, what Webb once thought to be the real-life kraken turned out to be nothing more than the rotting remains of, you guessed it, a whale. The Stronsay Beast. The St. Augustine Monster may have been the first globster to gain widespread attention, but it wasn't the first documented globster. That title belongs to the one that was found many decades earlier. After a storm on the island of Stronsay in 1808, located in the Orkney Islands, there was a gigantic serpentine creature that washed ashore. Dubbed the Stronsay Beast, it shared strikingly similar characteristics of the so-called Loch Ness Monster. The neck and tail were extremely long and slender, with a wider torso with 3 pairs of short paws attached. The creature had a mane of sharp bristles which continued down from the neck to the lower back. Today, over 200 years after its discovery, biologists still have no idea on what it actually was. Measurements taken at the time indicated the creature was 55 feet long from head to tail and would have been even longer if much of the tail hadn't already been decomposed. It was 4 feet wide and had a circumference of approximately 10 feet. It also had 3 pairs of paws or wings, and it had skin that was smooth when stroked to head and tail and rough when stroked tail to head. Its fins were edged with bristles, and it had a mane of bristles all down to its back. To add to the weirdness of it all, the bristles glowed in the dark when wet. While the most common belief is that the creature was a dead and decomposing basking shark, the animal's length contradicts that. Even the largest basking shark on record measured less than 40 feet. During the time period, the Natural History Society of Edinburgh attempted to classify the creature, but failed and concluded the beast to be a serpent. In the present, many cryptozoological figures have attempted to explain the enigma of the Stronsay Beast, but given the absence of photographs, it's unlikely that the mystery will ever be solved. Before we move on, I've got a little challenge for you that'll take 5 seconds to complete. So here's the deal. You just leave a like on this video, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, and you will get 25 years of amazing luck. Try it really works. The Canvey Island Monster. The Canvey Island monster is the name given to an unusual creature whose carcass washed up on the shores of Canvey Island in Britain in November of 1953. A second, more intact carcass was discovered in August of 1954. The 1953 specimen was described as being 76 centimeters long with thick reddish-brown skin. It also had bulging eyes and gills. It was also described as having hind legs with 5-toed, horseshoe-shaped feet with concave arches, suggesting that it did walk on 2 legs and yet no forelimbs. Its remains were cremated after a cursory inspection by zoologists who said that it posed no danger to the public. The 1954 specimen was much larger and weighed over 11.3 kilograms. It was fresh enough for samples to be taken from its eyes, nostrils, and teeth, though no official explanation was given at the time as to what it was or what happened to the carcass. Some have speculated that the creatures may have been a type of anglerfish whose fins have been mistaken for feet. Others say they're more likely to have been frogfish, which do in fact walk on leg-like fins, have bulging eyes, and take on a variety of colors, including reddish-brown. But of course, unless another specimen is found and modern scientific methods are applied to identify it, we may never know what it actually is. See you guys next time!